We're all living in a bit of a mess, aren't we? Our lives are all just a little fuzzier than we wish. I know I wish my life was perfectly manicured. I wish it was straight black and white lines and it followed a plan perfectly. I wish there were no cracks, no weeds, no bumps. But it's messy. I was reading some commentary online recently about a passage in the Bible. It was about Jesus and his conversation with the Canaanite woman in Matthew's gospel. I don't need to give a sermon on this passage right now, but the story contains some sections where it seems like Jesus is either being kind of rude and insulting or he's simply getting something wrong. Now, I'm not really sure what the story is about. There are people smarter than me for that, but I love the messiness of it. I love that it isn't perfectly manicured. I love that it's a little bumpy, it's a little fuzzy. If ancient passages about someone known as the Son of God can be messy, I don't know, maybe our lives can be too. We're all living in a bit of a mess, aren't we? Our lives are all just a little bit fuzzier than we wish. You all are going to love this episode. I am so glad you are here. Hey there, Betweeners. Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Between Podcast. This is your host, Matt Mattson, and I'm just delighted to introduce all of you to today's guest, Melissa Neeb. Melissa is a soothing online presence in the lives of tens of thousands of people. She writes beautifully about, she writes about faith and mental health and recovery and marriage and motherhood and self-discovery. You've probably come across some of her writing in any number of publications, both online or in print, including two recent books that she contributed to about motherhood. On social media, you can find Melissa writing from identities, including, here's the first one, Faith in the Mess. And I've always just loved your Instagram handle, Faith in the Mess, Melissa. We'll talk about that here in a second. And then the other one is Never Empty Nest. And those two identities, I think, give you some clue, some important clue that would give the listeners some important clues into the way Melissa approaches the world. She and her husband have two older teenage, young adultish kids, and I think like five or six different animals. They make their home in the land of 10,000 lakes, beautiful Minnesota. Melissa, I am so glad you're here with us today. Will you tell us a story about your week and, I don't know, give us a peek into your real life?
Well, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me. So, I don't know how many people know this about me, but I am an early education teacher. That's my day job.
Oh,
So, I'm a teacher in an infant room, and my week looks like I teach from 6 to 2:30, and they're all babies. So, think like about 3 months to 16 months.
wow.
And we currently have 12 babies in our room. So I get to be spit up on all day. I get to help babies take their first steps and hear first words all day. So it's pretty amazing. I love it. Um, I've been married for 19 years. I've got two kids, a senior in high school, and my son is a junior in college. So this week, my daughter raced her last high school race. She races Alpine in high school,
Oh, wow.
and she competed at sections this week. And so this week and really this year has been a season of grieving for me. Uh, Trying to keep that connection strong with her so that when she goes off to college, we still have that really good base and connection. And yeah, so it's been kind of a roller coaster week. We had all the babies this week,
Hmm.
then busy stuff with my daughter. So I'm glad it's Friday.
So you spend a large chunk of every day in a room full of babies. Like I think that is for some people that would be their definition of torture. For you, it's a career, it's a vocation, it's a
Yeah,
gift that you're giving to the world. I mean, is that why you write about adult issues in the blogging work that you do and in the writing work that you do?
that could very well be. I have such a passion for teenage years,
Yeah.
and I never thought that that would be the case when my teens got to be 13, 14, 15. They were going through a lot. We had a lot to navigate through. But at those ages, they started seeing me more as a human
Mm.
and as just a person that's making mistakes right alongside of them. And we've really built this beautiful relationship and friendship as they've gotten older. So honestly, I can say the teenage years have probably been one of my favorites.
Mm. As you well, I want to talk about your kids going off to college and the maybe the lessons learned from that, or the conversations, or the moments of connection that you've had throughout that. But before we get there,
Mhm.
let's I want to maybe start with your faith in the mess um, identity on social media, and the writing that you do and the content creation that you do within that space, because I think it might frame a lot of the rest of our conversation. I think in that work, you do a wonderful job of welcoming. I think this is your language. I don't think I made this up. I think I cribbed it from one of your bios or something. But I think you do a
Yeah.
wonderful job of welcoming spiritual wanderers and
Mhm.
religious black sheep, spiritual wanderers and religious black sheep. What
Yeah.
inside you, or what in your background, called you to serve those folks?
Well, there's a lot there. So my faith background, I grew up very ultra conservative Lutheran churches, private schools my whole life. Um, and then I would say probably 2020 or 2021, a lot of that foundation for me was shaken.
Mhm.
And it wasn't necessarily so much what was going on in the world, but my daughter was a freshman in high school in 2020. And some of the language that she started sharing with me really made me change my mind about a lot of things. So she came home one day, and I've told this story a couple different places, but it was such a pivotal moment in my life. She came home from school. She had a friend in this private school that had privately come out to her
Mhm.
as being gay. And in my religious background, you know, that was wrong, it was a sin, and so she came home and she said to me, "Well, I can't ever have this friend over here because he just came out to me." And that really made me stop and
Mhm.
think about what I believed, what she was raised to believe, and it just kind of it shattered the foundation, I think, for me.
Mhm.
And from then on, I really started thinking about every individual belief that I had held for so long and never questioned. Because in my faith tradition, we were taught never to question anything, never to express any doubts. And I don't know, I think my whole life I felt like I didn't fit into that mold. I never really liked going to church
Mhm.
as a kid, as an adult. I never felt like I fit in there. So when I said, misfits or black sheep.
Yeah.
That's really how I felt. And so my Faith in the Mess page has really just been a journey of deconstruction for me, kind of tearing apart all of those traditions and toxic beliefs that I've held for so long and measuring those up against what I feel in my heart Jesus would act like, what he would say to certain situations.
Mhm.
And yeah, so I'm just kind of unraveling all of that in a very public, raw space, I think. So,
And
yeah.
that's a gift for a lot of people. And I think I keep finding this over and over in what is very much a community, the deconstruction community, and it's folks at lots of different waypoints on a deconstruction or reconstruction of their faith journey. and there's folks coming from a lot of different backgrounds. I actually think it's really interesting, sort of a conservative Lutheran background. That's a very Minnesota specific
Right.
story, right? But that's not one that I think a lot of people automatically are assuming. Oh, there's a
Mm,
conservative wing of Lutheranism in Minnesota, right? I mean, I think a lot of people are quick to point to the South, or they're quick to point to sort of big Texas evangelical style, Alabama, that kind of thing. But we travel up north, and we find really similar challenges that people are going through as they're walking out of a faith from their past and into a confrontation, a beautiful, soft confrontation where your daughter comes home and says something, and you're confronted with, is that who we are as a family? Is that who we want to be as a family? That is a, can I ask about that conversation with your daughter? You certainly don't have to share any more details, but I'm curious enough to ask right now. Like, it sounds like she was just saying, well, a friend said this, and so they can't come to our house.
yep.
But maybe she responded in a way that was loving, or at least as loving as her experience would let her be at that time. I'm just so curious about how you and she discussed that, how you and your family discussed that, and gosh, what a heavy, heavy reality to be confronted with, I think.
Yeah, so she she said that to me and I was very shocked, but I shouldn't have been because that is the tradition that our kids were raised in.
Yeah.
Not that my husband and or I ever said that explicitly,
Mhm.
but just that she felt that her friend wouldn't be welcome in our home
Mhm.
because of something,
Yeah.
anything. It wouldn't have mattered what it was. And I never wanted to be that household. And so she confronted me and she has done such a great job. I just wrote something on this just the other day about how much she teaches me every single
Yeah.
day. And it really started from that moment. I was kind of in awe of her actually because she is surrounded in this culture of conservative Lutheran beliefs. And she was brave enough to say, this doesn't sit right with me.
Yeah.
I'm going to be his friend. I'm going to stand up for him. I mean, he was getting bullied at school. He ended up having to transfer schools, and it's just a really sad situation. But yeah, she kind of started that conversation in our house, and it changed everything. And
Yeah.
she knows that too. Like we've talked about that moment
Yeah.
numerous times over the years.
What a beautiful thing to be able to say to your kid, like that the way you showed up helped me uh helped me think about the biggest questions of life in a very different way. That
Mhm.
that is what a beautiful, what a what evidence of a beautiful relationship between a mother and a daughter. I am in awe of that. I really am. Because it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of trust. It takes a lot of humility and vulnerability to create that kind of a relationship with your kid.
Yeah.
Hmm. The the idea of, I think the metaphor of your daughter being afraid that another person wouldn't be welcome in your home. And later you said, you know, I wanted to shape my life more closely to the way that you understood that Jesus would
Mhm.
be, like what a simple question. Would we should we allow a person, should we welcome a person into our home? Is such a simple and profound question, I think, that a lot of people probably do have to confront, right? I mean, that is not a new idea, not a new concept. But what a really powerful, simple, clear, practical manifestation of the Jesus life come to your doorstep.
Yeah. I just envision Jesus as the table,
Mm,
the table that's wide open and people just keep coming up and it's all these different people that would never normally sit at a table together.
yeah,
And he's just jumping up and throwing his arms around everybody. And I mean, I really think that that's what we should be striving to do in our
Yes.
homes, in our communities, just that wild welcome.
Yes. There are two things you've posted on social media, not in the recent past, that I want to read back to you, and maybe we just play with these ideas for a few minutes. The first thing is this: you wrote, "What could possibly feel more like church than a long coffee date with my best friends, or watching the sun melt into the horizon, or holding the hand of someone I love who is hovering dangerously close to their last breath?" And then you wrote this simple and beautiful phrase in another post. You wrote, "Somewhere in the space between two people's hearts is church." Man, I love it, Melissa, when people say the things I'm trying to say, but they say it in better ways than I can say it. That was awesome. Those are, I mean, those could be the taglines of, I don't know, between like what the project we're doing, the effort
Mhm.
that we're making. Those are so spot on and very similar to things that I deeply, deeply believe. How do you think? Here, let's talk real life, practical stuff. How do you
Mhm.
think people can build churches in the space between themselves and the people they encounter on an everyday basis?
I think it, bottom line, it comes up to conversation, and not just conversation, honesty. Like, honesty is the most ultimate form, I think, of trust.
Mm,
So when you're completely honest with someone about your life and your struggles and your insecurities, that is such a high level of trust. And I think church is all those things. It's, for so many people, it's about a building, it's about a Sunday morning. But for me, not finding that safety in church, I find it outside of a building.
mm,
I find it in the conversations that I have every day. And I think it's really challenging ourselves to listen instead of always having a response ready. I think it's inviting people into our own pain so that they feel safe to share theirs. That's such a big deal for me because, a little background, my husband is a recovering addict, which I think a lot of people in my spaces on my pages know.
yeah.
But we lived in decades of shame and hiding and lying about our truths and our struggles and our suffering. And there came a day when we first got into recovery that we were done with it. Like, we wanted to be honest about our struggles, because what's funny is all the people that are gathered in those rooms, they might look different, they might have different backgrounds, but they all have the same struggles.
Yeah.
And so I think there's something really beautiful about being vulnerable and sharing our stories and honoring each other's humanity.
The idea of an honest room, um, as a way to think about church,
Mm,
a new simple definition of church: an honest room, a room where we
wow.
are open about our struggles and our insecurities and uh, in our dreams and our joys and every aspect of our life. We are honest, and it is a room where we are expected to be honest, and we
Mhm,
expect the people around us to be honest. That to me is a I've known recovery spaces before, both in the mental health world and in the addiction world, and there is something so sacred. I don't know a better word to use, but when those honest rooms, when a room full of people who are living with mental illness and seeking recovery, or a room full of people who are living with addiction and seeking recovery, uh, when that room is real and when it's honest and when it is well built on a foundation of shared agreements that we say we are going to be wholly us in this room right now with each other,
mhm.
because we can hold each other up if we do. Man, there is not much like that. If you've been in those rooms, there is not much like that.
Yeah, I always said to everyone that I think everyone should do a 12-step program of some kind because there is something about it that I think everybody needs no matter what your struggle. And I think the first time that I sat in a room, I had been living with my husband's addiction for several years at this point
Mhm.
and felt so alone and so ashamed. And just sitting in that room for the first time, I was like just blown away. Like there are other people that feel exactly the same way that I
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
And there is something so powerful in that.
It's because, I mean, so many people spend so much of their days, so much of their life feeling so alone, Melissa, right? Like, I mean, you must
Yeah.
hear that. You must hear that from the people who read your work and the people who respond to you on social media and respond to the writings you've done in articles and in books. But people feel so alone. And
Mhm.
to sit in a room and to hear oh, I'm not alone. I like really, I'm not alone. Look around. These are real flesh and blood human beings who are like me, who are living and who are also like living a full life and struggling in striving in their own ways. And yeah, there is something strange to me, I think, about how we don't often talk about how so many people feel so alone so much of the time. I just think it is like this undercurrent of truth in our society that nobody brings to the surface very often. You do a great job of it in your writing. You uh, obviously when you write from the faith and the mess, I just I think about the mess. What is the mess you're talking about? I think I want to know. But I mean, you've started to share some of the things in your life, your real life, that are messy, but also,
Yeah.
by the way, aren't unique, right? There are so many people out there experiencing a similar mess. Tell me, when you think about the mess, when you're writing to people who are in the mess,
Mhm.
how do you imagine them?
I think it's not really even extreme things. It's
Yeah.
just every day when we get annoyed or irritated or discontent. How often during the day do we feel discontent
Mhm.
with our job or our home life or our situation and we just want things to be different? Um yeah, I think it's just the daily struggles and parenting is messy. So my parents are getting older. My dad had a stroke 2 years ago. So midlife is
Yeah.
messy,
Yeah.
taking care of our parents well before we're ready to. It just, everything is so messy and we don't talk about it. And then with my daughter too, going off to college in the fall, there has been, like I said, a lot of grief that I've had to work through and so a friend of mine, Carol Moore, and I just did a talk in California at a women's conference about motherhood and faith. And someone came up to me at the end of the conference and just crying, and I'm crying. And she's like, no one talks about this stuff.
Mhm.
Like, I feel so much grief because my daughter's a senior and we just don't talk about it enough.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think anybody listening right now could go through their last month and name this is such an important exercise. I mean, I actually anybody who's listening, I don't normally break the fourth wall of this podcast, but let's do it. Anybody who's listening, think about your last month, and I want you to use your fingers and see if you can get up to 10 by naming things that were a little bit messy and hard in your life. And I'll bet you can at least get to 5. And I know for sure I could at least get to 10 by just looking at the last 3 days of my life, right? worried about aging parents, or we're worried about our own potential health scares, or we've got a kid who my daughter sprained her ankle and then had to get a x-ray. And that's a small thing, like it's a sprained ankle. What? No, yeah, but it screws up your whole next 2 weeks. And right, like, and her whole life is all out of whack and she's late to classes, right? These little things start to add up. And then you start to add in work pressures and you start to add in unrealized dreams and things that you wish were
Mhm.
happening, but you can't quite get over the, and then you look at financial challenges and everybody, and even if they're small, we're
Yep.
all living in these micro messes that
Yeah.
we then smile and assume the person we're talking to isn't in a micro mess. They are. You all just put 10 fingers up, everybody, or at least you got to five. We're the same. Like that. What a thing to realize. And to the next person you see, say, oh, like in your mind, oh, you're in a little micro mess too. I'm gonna have a little grace for you, and I'm gonna be curious about it, and I want to love it. Right?
Yeah. That's a beautiful analogy.
You you do a whole lot of work supporting moms. I know. Never Empty Nest really speaks to that particular demographic. And I know it's just been important to you for years to really speak into mothers and parents. You've raised your two children into emerging adults, and your second is heading off to college. I think, and I know your oldest is. You said he's a junior in college. Is that right?
Mhm. Yeah.
You've got to have some stories, and you started to hint at this earlier, but you've got to have some stories about moments of sacred human connection with them as I'm in this moment of grieving for you, as you're shifting into a new life phase with both kids out of the
Right.
house, and I'm sure a few years into college, your son has probably got all sorts of experiences that you've gotten
Yeah.
to love on him from a distance, and when he comes back. And anyway, I think now is a good time for any moments, any stories you've got, any anecdotes about that experience as a mother, sending your kids off to college and walking through that process of them finishing the years of being in your home full time. What are some moments of sacred human connection you can share with us?
I have a few phrases that I like to use. One of them that's probably most important to me is the words show up. And that has been instrumental in my relationship with my kids from little on. So obviously, it takes their whole childhood of showing up for them, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, being available for them, giving full attention to them. I can tell a story about my son a few years ago. He actually confronted me and he said, "Mom, I feel like I want to talk to you and I want to tell you things, but you're always busy doing something and you're
Yeah,
like, and you're not really paying attention and I don't feel heard." And that was a really powerful moment in our relationship where instead of getting defensive, I had to really take a look at myself and my behavior. Like, I need to put my phone down. I need to put my to do list. I need to stop what I'm doing
yeah,
and give him eye contact. And that is how our connection and our relationship is going to stay strong. So I really worked hard at it after that. And I think maybe I did a better job of it with my daughter. Um, but I have to say too, one of the things that moms really identify with. So my son in high school went through a period where he was not talking. Up until he got to high school, he was an open book, sunshine,
mhm,
smiles, laughs, all of that. And when he got to high school, he went through depression, he
mhm.
went through a lot of anxiety, and he really shut down. And that was really hard for me because he was my baby, of course. And we had had such a strong relationship up until that point. And that took a lot of navigating and patience, but those 2 words showing up still, even though he wasn't talking and he didn't really want me around in his business and stuff like that. Like, he was a pretty introverted kid and a gamer, so he was kind of in his own little world a lot. And so I would bring him snacks, and I would invite him to go get a burger, and I would linger in his doorway and
Mm.
just say, "Hey, if you wanna talk, if there's anything bothering you, I'm here." And a lot of the times he didn't, and I had to respect his boundaries, but still keep reminding him that I was there. And then he went to college, and he, like, came back to himself, and he blossomed and discovered who he was, and then, yeah, he loves coming home now and talking and telling
Mm.
me about everything. And it's such a beautiful kind of full circle moment to come back to that place of connection that I had with him from very young on, to get back to that again. And my daughter, kind of similar story, high school, there was a lot of depression and anxiety with her too. Like, we have it running so strongly through our family.
Yeah.
So I learned a lot from my son, uh, just showing up for her, being there for her, listening, inviting her. I'm a big fan of just inviting them over and over to do things,
Yeah.
even if they say no most of the time. Just me inviting them, I think, shows them that I love them and I want them to be around. And yeah, those are two big
Wow.
ones for me.
Show up is such a that's a pretty simple phrase that is applicable to a whole lot of our life, but I think especially with kids. I'd expand that to lots of members of our family probably need us to just invite them a little more often, just show
Yeah.
up a little more often. Because I think families in particular, I think about this often and sometimes write about the difficulties of creating moments of sacred human connection with family members who you have a long history of sort of patterns of relationship style with, right? Like you've
Mhm.
uh, every time, the holidays come, we show up, we always act this way, we always sort of act out our childhood selves around each other, and we always live on the surface. And I think there's a whole lot of families who, whether it's parent to child or uh, adult to our own parents or to
Mhm.
other people in our lives, our siblings, who we've got these patterns of standard types of communication, standard types of relationship that are hard to break through. And I think your
Yeah.
advice, just this simple advice of show up every once in a while, show up in new ways,
Yeah.
invite people to do things that maybe you're outside of those normal patterns. Those can be simple, beautiful gestures that do communicate that I love you and that I want you in my life and I want to spend more time with you. I show up is such a simple and beautiful and powerful
Mhm.
takeaway. I appreciate that.
Yeah. It really came to the surface too a couple years ago when my dad had his stroke. So my parents taught me that phrase of showing up
Mhm.
because they did it. They always, throughout my entire life, have done that. They were at all of my everything, all my childhood things. And then when I had kids, they showed up for me, for my
Yeah.
kids. So when my dad went through his stroke a couple years ago, that phrase really presented itself in a new way to me.
Mm.
Like, I don't know the right things to say. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm gonna show up for him and for my mom and just be there. It
Yeah.
it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. I think we worry that we're gonna say the wrong thing, we're gonna do the wrong thing, and really all they need is presence.
Yeah. Or we worry that we're going to be a burden. I mean, I think
Yeah.
you've got some Midwest sensibilities, and I grew up in Michigan, and we've got that sort of bred into us from a young age of don't be a burden, don't be a burden. And all of
Mhm.
I'm guessing your family's probably like mine of like,
Yeah.
particularly the women in my family, my mother and my grandmother in particular. I was just having this
Mhm.
conversation, how much her whole life is don't be a burden to others. And like, she never
Mhm.
wants that. And that's a hard thing to break out of. You know what? People, you're number one, you're not a burden. Number two, people want your energy in their life experience. It is not a
Mhm.
burden. It is a gift. And I've got to remind myself of that just because that's kind of where I come from sometimes too. Hmm.
Yeah.
I'm curious, you've talked about already, and I know you've written about the ways in which mental health struggles have impacted your life and your family,
Mhm.
and you've written about the ways that you work to stay mentally healthy. I know that's a really important part of the message you share with the world. What do you, I don't know. There's millions of people out there who are struggling with their own mental health. Some diagnosed, many not diagnosed, many in between any number of experiences that feel like a mental health challenge. But there are a lot of people like me who spent a whole lot of my life thinking that my mental health challenge wasn't enough, wasn't bad enough to seek help
Um,
for, or wasn't bad enough to talk about with other people.
Wow.
And I wonder about, I wonder from your perspective with all the writing that you do, what do you want people who are struggling with their own mental health to know? What do you wish for them, or what do you pray for them?
My wish and prayer for them is hopefully they have at least one person that they can be honest with
Mm,
about what's going on in their life. So I can speak from my own experience. Just recently, middle age comes perimenopause and like lots of different shifts in mood and hormones.
mm,
And I have gone through really serious seasons of depression and anxiety over the last year when I had been free of it for a long time.
mm,
And I wanted to do things differently this time. So, number one, I tell my family when I'm going through something.
mm.
If I'm depressed, if I'm anxious, if I am in a really bad place, I tell like my husband and my kids, I tell them what's going on. I think that's very important. And I also have friends that I tell. And I think a good friend knows when you get quiet.
Mm.
They can pick up on that. And I have friends in my life that will say, hey, something's off with you. I can tell you don't need to tell me what's going on or anything, but I just want you to know that I'm there. So I think that for me going through mental health struggles, it's helpful to know that other people notice and feel comfortable confronting me about it.
Yeah.
And also, I want to be the person that does the same for someone else. I don't think we should ever be scared to say, "Hey, I'm concerned about you." Um, yeah, I think it's just important for people to know that they're not alone and that their suffering matters. And I hope that everybody has somebody that they can talk to, whether it's a friend or a counselor or someone.
There's a there's something so I don't know. I think that for a lot of people, there's something so taboo about taboo is not the right word, but there's something so uncomfortable about just saying to my family members at dinner, "Hey, I think I'm starting to fall into a depression. I don't know how long it's going to last. I do know that I feel angry or sad or tired or apathetic or
Mhm.
I do know that I do know that I don't feel anything and I haven't for the last week, and that's typically a red flag for me. I wish there was like a I wish there was actually a flag you could put up outside your bedroom
Yeah,
door of like, like here's my mood issue of the week. Heads up, this is where I am at the moment. This could be something. I just want you to know because most of us are so inherently good at hiding it. We're
right.
so inherently good at faking it. We've trained ourselves for our whole life to fake it. When the when think about how simply helpful it is to just say, "Hey kids, I am experiencing a high level of anxiety this week. I don't know how long it's going to last, but I'm concerned about it, and I want you to just know about it. I don't need you to do anything. I just want you to know." Wow, what a simple idea, Melissa. That's what you said. I just tell my family. I tell them.
Yes. I so the family that I grew up in, you don't talk about those kind of things.
Yeah.
And if there's something going on in the family, you don't talk about it outside of the family. And I never understood that. That was always so frustrating to me. And so I think that's probably why I have done things differently with my kids. Like, hey guys, I'm going through it right now. So give me some grace, give me some space. I might be
Yeah.
breaking down 100 times a day, but that's what's going on. That's my reality.
Yeah.
And I think the more that people do it, I see more and more people do it online now too, just writing about
Yeah.
when they're going through something hard. And I think that gives people permission to be more open and honest about it.
Yes, I agree. I want to ask a question that is probably a little outside of our maybe planned conversation, but you mentioned this earlier, and this is what opened the door to me. But I noticed this was a few weeks ago now or something that you posted on social media. One of your posts said, "I'm heading to California. I'm going to do something really scary. I'll tell you about it after." And as soon as I saw that, I thought, I don't know Melissa that well. We haven't ever talked in person, but I'll bet she's speaking on a stage because I've seen
Yes.
that. I've seen posts like that before. And as a seasoned professional speaker,
Uh,
I also know the feeling of like all the excitement and anxiety that builds up before you go someplace. I'm pretty comfortable on a stage, so I have a hard time being dramatically empathetic. Mostly, I'm always just curious and I want to hear the story of how'd it go? What'd you learn about yourself? What'd you learn
mm,
about audiences and people? Because here's what I'll say, and then I'll let you answer that question. I think speaking on stage, there's a reason it's everybody's biggest fear. And the reason is because we're all so deeply afraid of not belonging. And it is the
mm,
most acute way we could feel if we do or don't belong to a group. If they clap and laugh, we feel belonging inside. It's a hormonal thing. We feel belong. If they don't laugh when we thought they'd laugh and they didn't clap as loud as we hoped they'd clap, we don't feel belonging. Also inside a hormone, like it is a animalistic instinct, right? I think the other thing I love about public speaking is it is a highly concentrated dose of human connection. What I think it can be a sacred, sacred space. It is full of vulnerability. It is full of you trying to connect with even just a handful of people, sometimes thousands of people in a crowd. And it's all the same stuff we use to try to connect face to face in a one on one conversation, just exploded out into a bigger place, right? So I'm so curious how'd it go. I'm curious what you felt up there, what you learned up there. Tell me about it.
yeah, so my friend Carol Moore, she writes for heymom.co. Her and I had never met, never talked a little over a year ago, and we decided to do a podcast together, just out of the blue.
Yeah.
And so we had been doing that, and then a few months ago, she messages me and she says, "Hey, do you want to come to California and do this women's conference breakout session with me?" And I was like, "Sure,
Yeah.
let's do that." Keep in mind, just like you said, public speaking, biggest fear,
Yeah.
something I never, ever, ever aspired to do.
Mhm.
But, I feel like at this point in my life, when God lays something in front of me, I like have to say yes. I
Yeah.
can't say no. So I agree to do it. Fly out there, never flown by myself before, so that was a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
But we spoke at this women's conference at her church, and over 1,000 women were at this conference. So there were 13 breakout sessions,
Yeah.
and we had no idea how many women were going to come to ours.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking 5, 10, 15, something
Yeah.
like that. And we're laying the handouts out, and my friend Carol lays out 60 handouts. And I'm like, girl, you are being really positive right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
And it's about 5 minutes before we're going to start. And there's maybe 10, 15 people in there. Thought, okay, this is exactly what I imagined. Then people come flooding in,
Hmm.
more and more and more women come in. every single seat was taken,
Oh,
plus
awesome.
standing room in the back. So that was very, very unnerving. But what I can say, the story I told you earlier about the woman coming up to me crying
Yeah.
about the grief she was experiencing, that did it for me.
Mm,
That was it. Like I knew exactly why I had to be there that day, why I was asked to speak,
yeah.
whatever. It just confirmed that for me. Um, yeah, it was just such a moment of raw connection. Two moms experiencing such intense grief in a season of motherhood.
Yeah.
And I felt seen, she felt seen, and yeah, it was beautiful.
Wow. It is beautiful. And it's such a, first of all, congratulations. It takes a lot of courage to say something, to say yes to something like that. Or that is a, there were 12 giant obstacles that should have kept you away from that, but you found your way there
Yeah.
and you got to feel the reward of when you put yourself in front of a room like that. It doesn't always go
Hmm.
well. I can tell you from experience, it definitely does not always go well. But if you, here's what I've learned about public speaking. Here's my free tip, Matt Mattson's free tip for everybody listening about public speaking. Uh, if you love your, if you're there for the right reason, if you love your
Hmm.
audience, if you are just putting love into that room, filling it with this, whatever you got, you are loving them. You are not trying to make them better or fix them or tell them how to do their life or uh, tell them what's wrong with them. If you just show up and love them in
Hmm.
whatever way that comes out of your mouth, it'll
Yeah.
work. And somebody will come up to you afterwards, like you experience. It's such a beautiful, raw connection. I love that you called it that because that's exactly what it feels like. Hmm. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, we've hit a lot of topics here. We've hit faith, we've hit motherhood, we've hit mental illness, we've hit addiction, and we've hit public speaking. So that's a pretty solid conversation, Melissa. I am so grateful you took the time to join us on the Between podcast. I'm so grateful for our interactions
Hmm.
over several years now on social media.
Me
Between
too.
the between stuff and your stuff over at Faith in the Mess and your other identities, I'm so grateful for that. Hey, if people want to read your work online or follow you on social media or I don't know, just get more into the heart of Melissa Neeb, what do you recommend?
So you can find me at Faith in the Mess on Instagram and Facebook. Never Empty Nest is my motherhood writing. That's on Facebook and Instagram. My friend Carol and I have a podcast called The Messy Mom Squad. That's on Spotify. And Carol and I have a book coming out this year. It's called Messy Hearts. And the subtitle is Essays for Brave Souls Who Feel Too Much.
Oh, what? That's what it's called? I feel like I didn't know that. That would
Yeah.
say, will you say the subtitle again? Because I feel like that's a whole other podcast episode.
Yes. Essays for Brave Souls Who Feel Too Much.
Oh, wow. There are a lot
Yeah.
of brave souls who feel too much, who I know are listening
Mhm.
to this right now and who are connected to our Between community. And I know they'll find you and they'll connect with you and they'll grab that book when it comes out. And Melissa, this has been terrific. Thank you so very, very much. I will see you out there in the mess sometime soon.
There we go.
Hey, thanks to all you betweeners out there for listening to this episode of the Between podcast. Make sure you visit between.church on the internet to sign up for our mailing list. That's probably the most important thing, our email list. Make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube. You can check out our 5-minute sermons, 5-ish minute sermons that we post every week. Follow us on social media. We got daily prayers. We got all sorts of other content. And join our community fully. We invite everyone. You are welcome here, no matter who you are or where you're from, no matter what you believe or even if you believe, no matter who you love or how you love, no matter what anybody else has ever told you about you. You are welcome and loved and celebrated here at Between. You know, my favorite church is the space between people. Now go with God's love and create the church between.